So this week we're going to be looking at the actual first drawing project. So I think most of you have actually submitted your um, first assessment, which is that calendar um, of time management. So I've seen most of them come in and they look pretty good, so there wasn't sort of any negative feedback I needed to give anyone. So I'll mark those this week. They're not due till Friday, but if they're in there a bit early, I'll start having a look at them. So with the session for today, I'll open that. Oh, not that one. That one. We're going to run through, as I said, like pretty well the assignment for this drawing project. It's the first drawing project, assessment 2, drawing project 1 out of 3. We'll do 3 projects as I mentioned last week, and so we'll look at the assessment and what we're actually going to do in the project in quite a bit of detail, and I'll go over exactly what we're going to do throughout this project. And part of that will be starting to do some research of the development plan for where that site is and how we sort of tend to do that in an office situation. And so you can start to look at that to see what the requirements are, and have a look at the Resi code that I mentioned last week and what that is and what that means and where you find information about that sort of stuff. And probably you might get a chance to start drawing up, but definitely start to sort of set up for your drawing, which is like setting up what template you're going to start with and making sure you've got everything ready to go there, and then it'd be pretty well drawing. So usually in a normal office situation, when you get a job, the first stage of that isn't just to start drawing it. You know, it might be a sketch and you've been given it from either a client or from the sales team or whatever, and say this is what the client wants and this is where the site is. So to determine what you can and can't draw up and how you're going to start drawing it up, you've got to look at the development plan for that area to see what's actually required. So there'll be things like materials that you're allowed to use, colours that you can and can't use, or suggestions, setbacks, so where you're going to draw it on the boundary, and it might be that what they've drawn doesn't quite fit on the site, in terms of you're not going to be able to meet the setback requirements for council. So there's no point in starting to draw it up and then realise later, oh, what I've just drawn up doesn't work anyway. So it's a lot of research to make sure that's going to fit. And part of what we look at in the Resi code is looking at all those things. So the other thing to do with material is it in a bushfire prone area, or what sort of wind speed and those sorts of things? Is it in a flood prone area? Has it got restrictions? Is it near the airport? Is there sort of specific things we have to do in terms of how close to the airport it is? There's different zones and that sort of thing. So that's all to do with noise. So I don't know whether you know, but sometimes if you've got a house that is in the closer zone to the airport, straight away you're up for lots of extra insulation and double glazing. So someone might think, I've bought a cheaper block there because it's in the airport, but the cost of that house is actually going to be increased significantly because of that zoning. Same with some of that same sort of area, sort of West Torrens Council. They've got that's flood. There's a lot of flood-prone areas around there. So in high rainfall periods, if you ever drive through some of the back streets of Coralta Park and through that sort of area through there, heading towards Marsden, you'll see older houses that have sandbags up their driveway. And so that's literally to keep the water from coming into their garages and sometimes just about into their front door. So what council's done in those areas now to change what happens through all those areas is you have to actually raise the block. So when you see new developments happening in there, you'll notice that one of the first things that happens is new fences go up, so new good neighbour fences, but underneath those fences is usually 2 concrete plinths. So, you know, you start to see that height, and then obviously start to fill the site to that level. So eventually you won't see the plinths, but they're basically mini retaining walls that are happening. So the site's set up, and that's about that flood-prone sort of areas. So unless we sort of know those things before we start drawing, what the area is, there's lots of little things that we sort of got to figure out. Bushfire-prone areas, what level of bushfire or BAL or ballot's going to be, is going to determine how much we have to do to the house in terms of different materials, screens on windows, all those sorts of things as well. So there's no point in, as I said, just drawing up what you're given. It's the research content that can take a little while, and depending on how many things that it highlights when you're looking it up, it depends on how long until you start drawing. Sometimes you just need to keep looking. Yeah, heritage, conservation areas. There's also some sustainability written into most development plans, and some of them have to do with rainwater tanks, which is obviously a part of it, and then obviously bushfire fighting tanks as well, so where are we going to locate those if possible, and then there's sometimes height restrictions on rainwater tanks. So they might say the tank can't be any higher than 2.4, so you might be thinking, you can go slimmer and higher, but then you can't, so you've got to go wider, and it messes up, the boundaries, etc. sometimes as well. When you deal with heritage areas, then obviously, there's lots and lots more things that you've got to really go through, colours and materials and reflective roof materials, etc., those sorts of things. So, yeah, that's quite a big task. And remember, on the other side of this, we've always got a client with their vision that we're working towards trying to satisfy, but, it's always that balancing act. So part the assessments, I'll just quickly use this and then we'll get straight into what the actual assessment tasks are or entail. But we've got all 6 of these. 2.1 is going to be the Resi Code checklist, so just filling that out, which we'll look at today. It's a digital PDF that you can fill in on screen as well, and then you just finish and submit it. Planning approval drawings, so that's sort of starting our preliminary drawings and getting them ready for planning approval. What drawings do you think we need for planning approval? Site plan, floor plan, elevations. No sections yet. Where would we find that information?
On the council website.
Yeah, so that's what we've got to do every council that we look at. It's one of the things we're going to say, let's have a look at what. So our first project's going to be in Marion Council, and we're going to look at Marion Council website and say, what do we have to produce for planning drawings? What do they want to see? Okay, and so that becomes a bit of a checklist. And so I think last week I mentioned to you in 2021 that obviously the planning's changing. That's the sort of thing that's going to obviously make it easier for us, because we're not going to be like thinking, okay, now what do this council want? What do that council want? It's going to be the same for every council. So we'll start to have a mental checklist of that. Once we've done the planning drawings, we've obviously got to start to have a look at checking those and against the development plan and making sure they're right. And there's a couple of checks that I've got in place as well. You submit those, you'll get some feedback from those, and then while that's happening, you just use those drawings to continue on. So in an office situation, usually it'll be in your folders, you'll have a folder that's planning drawings or preliminary drawings. There's multiple folders in an office: concept, prelim, planning, full working drawings, development approval drawings, or building rules consent. And so what we'll do is we'll save the file as planning drawings into that folder, and then you'll rename it and change the same file, but change it to working drawings, and then that's what you'll continue on. So you have got a saved set of the old ones, so you'll have those too, and that way if something comes back from planning and you've changed something further in your development, you can either go back to that, you've got a record of it, and just change something simple on that and resubmit it, or work on your other one, so you've got that extra copy. So once we've completed that full set of drawings, we're going to obviously go through the checklist, check all of those things. We'll get someone that's sitting close to you that's at about the same stage to check as well. So we always get checked in the office, and then submit those, and then obviously submit the file management snip, which we'll set up today, how we're going to set up your file structure, and then also if you've changed your time management calendar, just submit that. So the main bulk of this is the research, development plans, what we've got to draw, and the drawing. Okay. So as we sort of work through the next couple of weeks, I'll be the lectures at the start will really consist of where we're at. So next week will be drawing, right, what's the shape of the building, how are we going to set up our wall type, what are our wall heights, where do we start at, how are we going to do the annotation, those sorts of things, or what we need to annotate in planning, so we don't need to take it too far. How many strings of dimension, what we should look for at the planning stage, and those sorts of things. So we'll go straight over to that project. So the first thing I'll show you before we get into it is the actual full set of drawings that Rivergum use. And so this is going to be our project. So I've got some sketch drawing versions of this that you can use, but I've put this up to sort of give people a bit of an idea of the project as it stands. So pretty well what you see here, minus one of the section markers, is what your floor plan will look like in the end. So it's not too intense. It's a pretty simple little transportable building. One bathroom, a couple of bedrooms, and two sort of living meals spaces. So you can see it's, there's a few strings of dimension on each side that cover pretty well everything. So it's not, as I said, it's not too intense. So this will stay up, and you can use this as a bit of a guideline, but obviously we're not going to copy it exactly because there might be some things that you might change or tweak slightly. Elevations. So for elevations, again, you can see they're quite simple. They're showing the fenestrations on the building, so openings, the roof material shown by illustration and a bit of annotation there, and also the cladding is shown by having some weatherboard is shown by having that horizontal hatching pattern, and obviously our levels. And part of what they want in the Resi code is an overall height of building as well. So that's one of the things that you have to tick in the Resi code that you've got shown on your drawings. Elevation 3 showing the bathroom windows that are obscure. So you can see there, it's not annotated as such. It's just actually, explained through that image. We're not going to do the electrical plan, but it's there so that you know or understand how that might work. Anyone looked at electrical plans before or done them? They're quite simple drawings. The main part of an electrical plan is the legend. So you've got to start with a legend and what your symbols are going to be. And so an electrical plan has minimal text on it. It's mostly using a legend and
if you send your plans to someone like TAFE or when they do the electrical
yeah.
plan, is that something you can then include?
Yeah,
You don't need that for planning, but
no, not for planning.
So you don't actually always have to do the electrical
plan. No, so lots of manufacturers, Clipsal being one of them, will do that because they want their products on that plan, and so if you sort of say, look, I want that done, they'll do it in their office. They'll bring your PDF in, have a meeting with the client. What do you want? They've got all their switches and types of things, and they'll put them on the drawing for them. It's more a case of if you've got I tend to make sure my clients have got some idea before they go to those places, because if they get bamboozled by the bells and whistles, I suppose, they can start to blow their budgets out, but also they can miss important things. So what I do with my clients before they go somewhere else or whatever is I do a basic electrical plan. So I say, tell me how you use your kitchen. Do you like, two PowerPoints? Has your coffee machine got a separate one for the milk frother and one for the machine, or is it one plug for both? So that's because otherwise you're just taking up the two plugs. How do you use your kitchen? Do you like all your appliances out all the time, or do you interchange it? Do you get the toaster out in the morning and put it away, and those sorts of things? Um, Most of the important stuff that gets overlooked is sometimes the two-way switches. So, do you want a two-way switch for when you get in front door and turn the hall light on, and then be able to turn it off at the other end, and those sorts of things. Same upstairs and downstairs, not too bad. It's usually picked up. But amount of PowerPoints is usually a big one. So get the client to have a bit of an idea of how their bedroom's going to be laid out. Because if you think, oh, they would have their bed here, and there's where you put their side table switches, and then all of a sudden they come in and go, we're going to have our bed this way, it's all wrong. So that's pretty hard to change later, or expensive. Kitchen island benches, making sure there's enough power in there. Is the microwave in that section? Is there the dishwasher in there? So there's a couple of plugs already that you need electrical points for. And obviously part of that, if it's a slab, there needs to be conduit in the slab so that they can actually run the cable underneath. Otherwise, where's it going to come down? There's no wall there. Sorry?
Like if they've got an island bench with a good PowerPoint on it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so most island benches they'd want some power. Yeah. So if it's like completely disconnected, as an island would be, it can't come from the ceiling. There's no wall there. So they need to make sure there's an allowance for that pretty early in the slab. And so yeah, if your microwave's in that island underneath and a dishwasher, as I said, there's 2 points of power. And those switches aren't really accessible for daily use. So if someone says, well, I'm going to do most of my prep here, what do you need when you're doing some prep in the kitchen? Stick mixer, those sorts of things. So power, sometimes you might be doing some cooking with, a mix master, whatever it is. I do loads of that stuff with my daughter, so I know that, where the power needs to be, because otherwise it's cords kind of across. It's just, yeah.
Never have too many in the kitchen.
Yeah, that's right. I think the kitchen's a place that I always make sure that for my clients that there's plenty. Whereas when you've got like a lounge situation with TVs, you've usually got somewhere to hide the cables, so you can have a double adapter or something like that if you need. Because, when you think about the back of your TV, how many things that you plug in, there's no way you're probably going to, say I'm going to have 8, GPOs on this wall. You'll probably have 4, and then you'll have a couple of double adapters and things as well, or power boards. And that really shows someone, where the switches, the best place for the switches and those sorts of things. So it's just quite a simple drawing to show switches when you come in, GPOs where you need things plugged in. Bathrooms as well. Lots of people sort of do lots of things in bathrooms these days in terms of hair dryers and straightening irons and all that sort of stuff. So often they need a couple of extra points. This is the sections and details that Rivergum produced for this drawing. Oops, sorry. Trying to put this one down a bit. So we're not going to do all of these details. We're just going to do one detail and one section. So our section is going to be at 1:50. So we'll be able to show a bit more detail in the section. So this one's done at 1:100. We'll do 1:50. But in terms of when we show that, so this will be when we get to the building drawings, not the planning drawings or this sheet. We'll only show that much detail in the roof. We don't need to show the trusses with the cords being completely drawn. You can see the chords are just a detail line there. That's what we'll do. We'll keep it really simple because it is a manufactured product, so we don't need to work out that size. But when we get the detail, this is the one that we'll do here, detail 1. So we'll just show how that truss, and we will show the bottom and top chord in a bit more detail with the nail plate, etc., sitting on top of the top plate, coming down to how it's sitting on the blocks on the ground. Okay, so we will use this as a full detail 1 and 2 when we do it, and this one at 1 is to 50. Okay, so don't get bogged down in this one over here. We don't need to do that one. Some students in the past have done it just because they wanted to do some extra stuff. You can always do more work if you want, but it's not going to be something that I'll mark in great detail.
Sorry, Jason, so we're doing the 2 details and 1 section?
1, 2, but we'll do that as one detail.
Okay.
Yep. And then so we'll just do a call out of that side of the section. So like we'll just do a bubble up, a rectangular one. Yep. And then the section will be 1 to 50. That's all written in the assessment task anyway. So they've also got their kitchen details or joinery details here as well. We're not doing those. Okay, but they're just there as the set, so you can sort of see what typically would go out with a little transportable. So you can see when they do these sorts of things in the kitchen that it's quite important to allow the right space for the fridge. If the client was buying the fridge from Rivergum, that would be the actual fridge in there, not just a dashed line. In this case, it's just showing where the space is. Where the dishwasher provision is, so that there's under the bench there's a dishwasher going in there. Obviously they're not buying it from there as well because it's just the space. Where the oven's going to go and where the sink's going to go and what sort of sink it is. So that's important because obviously this can be used by a few people like I mentioned last week. So an electrician and a plumber would probably look at this to see, just to make sure that everything's located in the right position. We need power and electricity here. We need water here. We also need power and electricity. Power and water there. Obviously power, possibly gas here. And obviously electricity here. And there may be water there as well. The client might want a plumbed fridge. Okay. So that example will stay there, but just remember it's not exactly what we're doing. We're not doing quite as much, but the floor plans and the elevations are pretty good examples there. So the assessment 2 drawing project 1 information is in here, so all of your sort of specifications. And what I'll get you to do is save a copy of this when we set up our file structure, which is sort of written in here anyway. So this is sort of probably the document that you'll have on your second screen as we're drawing and researching. You'll drag that over and start to use that as a bit of a reference. So it says here in the instructions that we're obviously doing a 1-story transportable house, and so I've given you some sketch drawings, and the sketch drawings are typical of what you might receive from a salesperson or a client, probably a little bit better than what you'd get from a client, but you still have to interpret those and sort of make some, I suppose, judgment in terms of what some of the measurements might be, etc. So we're going to put a fictitious address against this site, which is 10 Mavis Avenue in South Plympton. And so that block I picked because it was in the Resi Code area, but also it was a blank block that was getting redeveloped at the time. It's starting to be developed as some townhouses now, so I'll change it for next semester, but it hasn't actually changed completely, so we can still use it as a residential single house site. Part of the requirements for this unit is that you do draw with a software industry relevant software it calls for, so Revit or AutoCAD, something like that. As I was mentioned last week, you probably wouldn't want to do it hand drawing anyway. So the drawings are going to be suitable for client sign-off and for use with a council's submission for approvals and for construction purposes. Council's Marion, so we're going to use the City of Marion information to be applied with an application. I've got a link straight to that which tells you what information you need to supply with that, so you don't have to sort of find it too hard on the site. Now, all work's to be done on your own, but obviously when we're in an office, we still work as a team. So what that means is if you need to ask someone a question or anything like that, I mean, it's all assessment, but you can actually ask. So say, oh, I'm having trouble with this, I'm having trouble. Someone else, oh, have you just done that? How did you do that? Absolutely no problem at all, because that's how we work in an office. Don't sit there, and I'll be here as well, so you can ask me lots of things, but don't sit there for more than 10 or 15 minutes trying to think about how you're going to do something. If you've sat there for 10, 15 minutes, just ask me or someone else. Don't just sit there thinking, oh, I don't know what to do here. I mentioned last week, every task of the assessment, you'll get one resubmission as well. So if you submit 2.1 and it needs something else done, you can resubmit it again after I've given you your feedback. Okay. So each drawing has to be on a title block and obviously have the right information on it. And I'll show you how to fill out those title blocks as we go. You can obviously use any CAD blocks or Revit families that you want, so you don't have to draw everything from scratch. Anything that we use in an office is usually a template. We've got a library full of things. We're not redrawing everything up from scratch. So I'll show you some good sites to go on to if you're looking for specific information, but most of you probably know some of those things already anyway. So looking at this project, in terms of construction, it's a little transportable house and it's 90 studs for all of the construction, and it is they're using a James Hardie prime line cladding, which is a weatherboard cladding. So there's a couple of different versions of prime line when you look that up. I don't mind which one you use. It's not really going to change what we're drawing up. So you'll sort of just need to sort of see the thickness and what that board might look like in an elevation. Internal walls are 90 wide studs as well. The room dimensions and all the door and window sizes are shown on the sketch plans. When we start to draw all the windows and doors in, it's quite important to try to get to manufacturer's standard sizes as well. So these sizes might be sort of rounded up a bit or they might be down. So we're going to actually look at some manufacturer's window and door sizes and get them to the exact size. So we'll change our family so it actually is that correct size. Does anyone know why we might do that for a project like this? Why would we use standard size windows?
It's cheaper than getting them.
If you have a look at this project, like a transportable project, it's not like an architectural statement, is it? A transportable home. It's just going to be somewhere that's obviously probably a beach shack or maybe just something that's used maybe permanently, but it's obviously a low cost type of dwelling. So someone's not going to want you to put in custom sized windows and pay extra for those windows. So, and most of the time a custom window is usually not that much different. Sometimes if we're drawing window sizes in, not that much different than what we can get. There's lots and lots of standard sized windows and doors and things we can get. So if you do decide custom for a job, you just got to make sure the client's aware that usually, if it's just one or two of that size, it's going to cost probably about 50% more than the standard size that's close to it. Okay. The reason why is sometimes if you've got a lot or you've got a good deal with the manufacturer or industry's a bit slow, they might actually do it as pretty close to the price. But most of the time, it'll be they've got to change all their machines to make your size. All their machines are set up for those standard sizes. They've got to actually do that, and then there's room for error. So then they've got to sort of have that built into their cost as well. So it turns up on site that's wrong, comes back to them, they've got to do it. So they do tend to charge a bit for custom sort of stuff. There's a fair bit of compliance in when we do drawings, and that's why you've done it before as a subject, and you start to really understand it. But specifically for this project, what we're going to be looking at is obviously our drawings are going to be to the Australian Standard for Drawings, architectural drawings, which is the 301, which I have put a link to on the site there in that week 1 information I showed you last week. And then when we're drawing, obviously there's certain aspects of the build that we'll have to check out the NCC. So the gutters and downpipe selection, we'll have to look at the NCC to make sure that we've got the right amount of gutters and big enough downpipes to take that water away. The smoke alarms, where they need to be located and how many. Termite management, what we're going to put on the building in terms of some notes and what we're going to actually show in the drawing for that termite management system. And also this particular drawing has a part of it that we need to look at in terms of construction of sanitary compartments. Any ideas what that might mean?
To do with the bathroom, not the waterproofing and that sort of thing.
No, but good guess. Yeah. Yes. So it's not necessarily disabled access, but it's accessibility. So what you might have noticed in the drawing in the example, or we'll look at now, this toilet in here, if that was a normal hinge door, doesn't comply with the NCC. So the NCC requires, if a door swings past the toilet there needs to be a 1200 space. And so that 1200 distance within the door swing, or from the door swing, means that if someone faints or collapses on the toilet and it's locked, emergency services can actually open the door without crushing the person. Because if someone's lying in that door swing space and they've got to push the door open, it's going to cause them quite a bit of injury. So in the case of these sorts of tight toilets, and probably everyone's seen them in houses, and a lot of the sort of houses that were built before the 80s still have like these ones.
Open the door and there's that much gap to the
and you have to walk around the toilet to shut the door and those sorts of things. How do they get this one through? Well, there is some scenarios. So there's actually a couple of different things you can do. And up in the top left-hand corner of this drawing, you can see what they've done. Lift off hinges to water closet. So you can use the lift off hinge.
So lift off hinge isn't necessary if there's a swing space, that's 100.
No, so the lift off hinge will work for this because they would just actually lift the door off rather than push through that space. Okay.
Because I thought they were required anyway. So it's only if there's not.
Only if there's not that 1200 space, and we'll look at the diagram where we look as well, because it makes a bit more sense when you see that in the NCC. So I'll put the clause there. The other option is you can have a sliding door, cavity slider door, because it takes away that. Lift-off hinges are obviously in every commercial build. When you go into a cubicle type situation, if you look at the hinges on the back of the doors, next time you're in there, you'll see that they've got this little slotted angle. So that's the lift-off hinge as such. And they're a bit different because there's no architrave, there's no sort of top and bottom to those doors, so you can imagine they come off quite easy. In a residential situation, if you ever go into one with a lift-off hinge, you'll notice that there's a gap at the top of the door. You don't see that from the front. The architrave is actually built over that, so it looks like it's flush. But when you're in the back of the toilet and you look, you notice that there's a good gap under that door with the architrave in front. You'll see that. So that's how that works. So it's really important to know that because it's one of the compliance things. So we can draw it up like this as long as we've got that note on our drawing. Okay, as long as we're saying that. Or you might decide to change that configuration around a little bit, which I'm happy for you to do. Okay. That bathroom for me doesn't really work how I would prefer a bathroom to work. It's got a access to the bathroom from bedroom 1, but it's really just access to the bath, shower, and another door. So you really got to walk through 2 doors to get to the vanity, and then another door to get to the toilet. So if you're in the middle of the night in here, you've got 3 doors to walk through. If you came out here through the living, you've still got 3 doors to walk through. So I would tend to configure that space a little bit differently. And I've actually had a house like this that I've bought before that had a similar situation to this, and I knocked out all these internal walls because when someone's in the shower and that, the chances of someone obviously needing to use the toilet and wash their hands are, it's not a massive part of the day. And families tend to go in there anyway. So, if someone's in this shower here and someone went in and there was still a door and this toilet went in there, it's not a problem.
Especially if you've still got some visual barrier to the
Yeah,
shower
so there is
anyway.
anyway because that linen's still there. So really, if someone's in there, it's only going to be if they're here drying themselves. If we've got rid of that wall, so maybe a better scenario might be a sliding door in there even. So there is the ability to shut it, but most of the time it might be open. One less door. So there is obviously opportunity to change that a little bit there anyway. I just find that probably, especially with the, that linen door being open there. Actually, that's an opening, not a door, so that's linen. But, that linen door swinging open into the entry of that, is a bit of it's just too many doors for my liking. So,
Change it to shelves or something.
yeah. And it could even open from this side, How often are you getting new linen when you're in the shower or the bathroom? Like it's, I don't know about you guys, but if I do the washing on the weekend and take all the sheets off the bed and that, I don't necessarily need to go into the bathroom to get them. If there was a central linen cupboard or whatever, if you put all the towels in the wash, you put the new ones on straight away. You don't just leave it till you get out the shower and go, I forgot what you do sometimes, but but it could be out. So so you can have a bit of a play with that if you want. Otherwise, the most important thing is going to be making sure that door has the right documentation. So you can draw it like that if we've got it noted on the drawing that it's lift off hinges, or on our little door schedule we can write that. The same with these windows here. You can see that these windows called OBSC. Any idea what that might stand for? Obscure. Yep. So obscure glazing on those 2, which is required on bathroom and toilet windows. Also, safety glass is required in the bathroom area, so that if someone's standing in the bath and falls, the window doesn't shatter. The safety, or it will shatter and stay together a little bit rather than actually cut through. And I suppose while we're looking at this, we can sort of see how they've set up their door numbers: 12, 15, 12, 12, 6, 6. What does that mean? Sizes, yeah. What sort of size? What might the 12, 15 be talking about? Height and width, or width and height? Which one comes first? I'll let you decide on that. Height usually comes first, yeah. However, on the sketches I've given you, I've actually changed a bit of it because people do get that wrong and we need to interpret what they're going to be. So height and width, and it means 1200 by 1500. However, if they're standard windows, that won't change even if this is 12100. It'll just be written as 12. Okay?
It's just rounded.
Rounded down or up, yeah. So sometimes you'll see a 1515 and the actual manufacturer size would be 1450 by 1540 or something like that. Okay? So that's not bad on a planning drawing because it's giving them a pretty good idea. When we come to obviously full drawings, we'll do a window schedule, and that's where we've got the exact sizes on that as well. So you don't have to necessarily do a window and door schedule and tag everything in a planning drawing. You could just put your numbers on. And I'll show you in Revit how we can actually get this to populate for a window automatically. We can use what's called, it's a tag, but it's called a multi-category tag. And when you use a multi-category tag, you assign a number to that window so that it'll come up next to the window automatically. And if we use that window again and just go multi-category tag, it will come up automatically the number that is associated with that family. So I tend to use multi-category tags in planning drawings all the time and do them a bit like this because that's all the info they need. And also multi-category tags are quite good for things like fridges, dishwashers, where you've got all these notes. You can actually assign that tag to those so you don't have to manually draw or write all that annotation on. So it just saves a bit of time, but also error. So we don't have to sort of think, oh, I've just retyped something, now I've got to do a spell check, etc. It's going to be part of that family. And then next time you start drawing, you've already got it set up. It's part of that family. So those NCC details are something that obviously we've got to get right, and that's what we'll be sort of having a look in the marking. Documentation management. So obviously we've got to sort of start to think about backing up and having some saved copies. Because if you lose your drawings, you'll have to redraw where you were up to. There's no other way back, so think about that. I would tend to work on an external hard drive in class, and when you finish your drawings, back up to OneDrive. And then when you get home, use your hard drive and back up again to OneDrive. That way that the storage device that you're actually using is sort of almost your backup, but your working file. The OneDrive is if you've forgotten your device, bring it to class, you go, I was working on it last night, I can just tap into OneDrive, it's there, okay? And the same as if you've lost it, you'll have it there. The folder structure that will work for us for this all projects will be, we'll set up one, and you can do this while I'm talking if you want, set up one on the device that you're using, and then that whole folder could be saved over to OneDrive. So the first folder will be working drawings. Now you might have another subfolder called TAFE Semester 2 2019 or something like that beforehand, but for this subject, working drawings will be the first folder.
You want them wording exactly how you've done it?
No, you can put the code as long as you know where it is and what it is. But so it's going to have all of our projects in there. And then the next within that folder, the first subfolder is going to be Project 1, and within that folder, we're going to have 4 folders. Now you can have some extra folders if you prefer, depends how you want to work, but as a minimum, additional information. Now that doesn't have to necessarily say additional information, it might say specific project information, might say assessment tasks or something like that. Client correspondence, so that's going to be all your client letters that you're starting to work on, any notes that you might want to send to clients, etc. Anything that you get from the client, you can save it in there. Drawing files, so that's going to be most of your drawing files, and eventually within that one you might set up a subfolder within drawing files called preliminary drawings and final drawings. And another folder called research. And in one of those folders that you think, maybe it's in client correspondence or research, wherever you think, I would set up a Word document called drafting notes. So that when you're doing things, if you've got little questions at home that you think, I'm going to ask when I get into class, it's not worth an email, it'll just be a quick one. Or if you've got things that you've done and you're not sure, make sure I come back to check Windows 6. So it's just a way of you sort of taking it out of the back of your mind. You've got so many other things to think about. And then when you wake up in the morning, you'll think, what was that I wrote in there? Oh, yes. So in an office with drafting notes, some situations would be if a client's asked you to do something, you try to do it and then it doesn't work. It's not like you've just ignored it. You're writing in there, tried this, it doesn't work, so I've changed it to this, so the client knows, or if the salesperson that's talking to the client can look in there and figure out what's happening. And it also might mean that you needed to ask for some help in the office because it was something complex that you just couldn't work out. You asked around, let's just wait till such and such gets back from lunch. I'll drafting note it so it reminds me, because by the time someone, whoever it was that you were going to ask, maybe it's the BIM manager, he's gone to another meeting, you're working on 10 other projects, you come back to that project, oh, that's right, I was going to ask him that, oh, he's gone again, so you've got those notes there, just come back. I was going to ask you something, I just can't quite remember. Anyone ever done that? Yeah. Everyone does that. So the folders there, I suppose, what you could do once you've set those up is you could actually copy all the subfolders. So within working drawings folder, if you highlighted those ones now and then did a copy and then paste and change project 1 to project 2 and then do it again, so do 2 pastes and then change 1 to project 3, you won't have to set up that structure again next time because you've already got those blank ones for the next 2 projects ready to go.
What is the common way of spelling drafting?
Drafting?
In Australia, because there's 2 words.
Yeah, drafting, yeah. Americans draft into, that's like, you've got a GH, yeah. So hopefully we've set up those folders now. Now, this document that we've got open now, I would do a save as now and put it into maybe your additional information, or it could be in your research. You decide where you want to do that. Or you might name that additional information once something might be project information. So what that gives you the ability to do if we start to save some of the PDFs in there is if you ever go home and your internet's dropped out, or if you came in here and there was a problem, it doesn't stop you from working. You got your information, you've got your drawing package, you can still keep going. So in most drafting offices that I've worked in, the reliance on the internet is really for sending and receiving things, you're not on there all the time while you're working. It's really, you've got your folders set up with specific information. And so a lot of the research folders, there's always a standalone folder on the server in an office that's got lots of development plans already saved in there and updated, lots of materials in there. So once upon a time we used to have massive rooms full of big compactus that had all the reps came in and they'd give us the latest books and samples and all that sort of stuff, and yeah, everything was just there, and you'd go in there and get hit, hide in there after lunch and you know, have a look at things and take it back to your desk and then that sort of thing. But these days it's all digital, so there's a central sort of folder that everyone looks at. Finding in an office where the folders are is sometimes the hardest thing about starting a new job, you know, because you'll go, where was that one saved? And it'll be in a really obscure folder buried deep in 10 other folders. So underneath that, we've got on the assessment sheet, we've got all of the nitty gritty of the project, so all the specifications in terms of the footings, external wall sizes, ground levels, what the floor bearers and the joists are, insulations, basically everything you need to sort of start, you know, getting your drawings started. So it's got some kitchen information in there as well, underbench oven, hot plate, fridge sizes. So that's what you will use for your making sure your space is all right, those sizes. And then underneath that, there's a bit of a sketchy version of the actual plans. You can see it's just a little bit rougher. It's got some information on there. It's got some room sizes. So I don't mind you using this one and the actual one. You decide, you know, on your dimensions and how you're going to get that information. But usually, you know, this would be probably as much detail as you'd ever get from a client, if not less. So, you know, you've got to sort of sometimes work out room sizes based on area and try to work that out using your overalls. A couple of illustrations of the elevations. And then obviously when we start to look at what you're going to submit down further, for the Resi Code checklist, all, you know, just filling out every bit is what I'm going to be looking for when I mark it that you've done. In the planning approval, cover sheet, site plan, floor plan, elevations, partial dimensions on the floor plan, so just a few overalls, a couple of strings each side. In the elevations, material descriptions, what, you know, so pretty basic, and obviously just the right scale. When you do the checklist for the full set, that you have completed the checklist, and when you do the full set, I'm going to be making sure you've done all those compliance items that were mentioned correctly, and then obviously the sheets there that I've listed with full dimensions and full annotations on it. File management, just a screenshot of your file management. If anyone's not sure how to do that, I can show you how to use the snipping tool. And then obviously just a resubmission of your time management calendar I've mentioned, and so that it's been updated. So that's basically how I'm sort of marking things as well. When we'll go through the other information in a second, but when we're getting to the stage of submitting to the end, I've put everything sort of, that's just a copy of this assessment sheet there. Everything's in here, as you've probably noticed, and there is a bit of a lock on the final submission, so it's actually not available until you've done the checklist. So you have to have done the checklist and tick that button before you can actually submit in there. Just a way to sort of remind you that that's what you have to do before. And this one here, I've actually set up this assessor's checklist for to make it a little bit easier for you to see what you might have missed. When I'm marking, I actually will use that. And so when you eventually open up, there's just a heap of, this is all the stuff that I'm going to look at your drawings and make sure. So when I mark that, it'll have a tick next to it that you've done it, or it might actually have a comment behind it. So it might say, no, wall section not at correct scale, and that's your feedback in terms of what you have to do. So the feedback in the submission area might be, please see checklist with markups, and that way it'll just give you a bit more description of what the bit is that I'm sort of need a little bit more information about. So hopefully they'll work quite well. That's sort of a newer feature that we played with at the end of last semester that seemed to work for people quite well. So, should we have a little break? Stretch the legs, stand up, yeah. 10, 15 minutes enough, or, yeah? Okay, cool. And then what we'll do when we come back is we'll just, I'll go through like the checklist to use for the development plan, so then you can start to have a look at that and using the checklist find the things. I'll show you some sites to look at to find them, and then the information that we're going to supply with the application, so where that is on Marion Council's website, and I'll also just show you that Resi Code checklist, and I'll show you how to look for if something's in a Resi Code area, how to get on the site there. All good? We'd be looking at the Marion Council website to start to have a look at what sort of information is required. And in an office, this development requirement checklist that I've set up here is sort of a smaller version, I suppose, of what an office might have set up for each job. Like it's a blank sort of sheet, and you'll go through and just like fill that out in quite early on in the planning stages. So the types of things that are obviously on here is, you know, what sort of drawings have to be submitted to council? Are we doing planning and building approval, or just one or the other? So is it planning and building or just planning at this stage? What information, if any, needs to be added to the site plan? So this is more that if there's some generic information that they say like has to be on, so you don't have to keep revisiting when you're drawing, you've got it snipped right there. So it might say, you know, make sure site plan, you might say minimum setback of, you know, or something like that, or setback doesn't apply or something. And further down, and that's to do with all those drawings, further down, there's actually sort of setback, side, rear, garage, upper level. So when the development plan talks about what they're required, you can fill those in. The council development area, the policy area, the date that we referenced that plan, so that we know that if things change, you can say, oh, actually, I looked at it this date, that was before that. Is it in the residential code area? If yes, then obviously we go straight to the Resi Code checklist, which we'll look at in a minute. What sort of bushfire requirements, if any? Is it heritage? Is it flood zone? Is there any overlooking issues? And if there's any overshadowing issues for a two-storey house? Rainwater disposal, minimum sizes. Is it in a corrosion zone? Energy efficiency requirements specific to that development. So that sort of tends to be pretty generic with most development plans. Where that'll get more detailed is often there'll be like a little area that a council policy area that they might say we've set this up as a sustainable village or something like that. So Aldinga's got an eco village, so they have their own set of rules that sort of add on to the development plan sort of stuff. So you got that as a minimum plus those. In Camberwell, there's a eco bit there. What's it called? Lochiel Park, I think it's called. So they have their own set of sustainability things, and also height restrictions, volume restrictions, and those sorts of things in that. So there's always extra things that you need to look at if it's in one of those sorts of areas. Any specific roof cladding requirements or building materials that might be necessary. So they might say, you know, it's a heritage area, then you might go through that and it might say, you know, stone, timber, whatever it could be, you know, that's a requirement for the front facade only, or etc. So that's sort of like a bit of a snip. Usually this is a bit more long-winded in an office. You know, it goes into a bit, but I don't want you to spend hours and hours on it. We'll just sort of start to extract some of that information. So if we go to, let me just go to a new, so here, Marion Council. I checked that link only last week and it was working, so they've changed their link somewhere. So if we go to Marion Council, and we go straight to their development section. So if you go scroll down when you get into it, you'll see there's a little icon that's development, a little circle with a house in it. Planning and building, and a whole heap of information there. Their development plan, which we'll need to keep a copy of. So if you want to grab the development plan from there, might actually take you to the DipTie website. Yeah, it does. So you can go to that there. So keep a copy of that, and that's what part of what you'll be looking at to sort of fill out some of that checklist. So if you go sort of to the planning and building section, there's some quick links that you can go to. They have just updated their website the last week by the looks. So we've got development guides and forms, and also online lodgement, which they've literally just started. So they're obviously starting to think about 2021. And development online tracking, which is a really good thing that a few councils have been working on lately. So that means that they're going to get less phone calls of to say, where's my application at? You can actually have a look and there'll be a progress bar in there if you've got a development application number. So we go into the guides and forms. The link that I did have set up that's obviously moved was to this one, information to be supplied with an application. So that link there shows us, gives us a bit of an introduction to what this is and what they want. So we all understand that it's a two-part application, I suppose, planning and building rules, and the full development approval only comes when you've got approval for both of those parts. So we can put in most instances at the same time for both. In some instances, if you're not quite sure how you're going to go with planning, heritage areas, you know, those sorts of things, you push in the setback limits, so you might actually just put your planning permission in first and wait till you get the feedback. So usually you'll know how much you're pushing the boundaries by looking at the development plan, and also always talk to council when you're putting something in. Like, there's always a duty planner. So one of the planners takes turns or is on a roster every day to be on the front desk or called out to the front desk. So when you say, ring up to say, can I talk to the duty planner? That's the one that's on duty that day to take calls. They will talk you through anything in the development plan that you're not sure. So you might say, look, I've got this house, it's on this particular site, and they'll get it up on their website and have a look, and that you might say, I'm just not sure how the setbacks would be, and then they can actually do some measurements on their site and say, look, you probably need to go to the one next door, that would be as far as you go, it's probably approximately 8 metres or whatever it is. Then if you've got sort of more questions or you want to show them some information, you can always turn up. You don't have to make an appointment, and you just say, look, I want to see the duty planner. They'll come out and they'll go through your drawings and any specific questions. You'll get quite a bit of feedback. Like, they'll sort of say, look, that's looking really good. You know, I don't see any red flags at this stage. And there might be some things that they say, I'll just take these out the back for a second, won't be long, and they'll disappear for 10 or 15 minutes. And they're obviously asking the other planners, anything here, no one see anything come out, you know, or they'll come out and say, we've noticed that this and this, you know, so probably that wouldn't get through if you want to amend it, After that, they will also, most councils will, say you can actually do like an informal lodgement. So just come in and give it to one of the duty planners and say, can you take these for a couple of days and we'll do like a preliminary assessment on your plans and give you a more thorough feedback. Because obviously when they just start looking, they're only just discovering things. But if they're actually looking at it over a couple of days, passing it around the office, everything that will come up. So never be afraid to sort of say, oh, I don't really want to give it to council, I don't want them to see something, or I don't want to get the feedback, or whatever it is for some reason. Because if you're doing that, it means that you're going to probably do too much work and get a surprise and have to change something later. So much better. They prefer it. I prefer to work that way as well, because you can give the client the feedback. I've spoken to council. Sorry, we're not going to be able to go quite as close to the front boundary as you wanted, etc. So what sort of things do you think in general a planner might be looking at from a site plan as a first instance? What are the first things they might be looking at?
Boundaries and setbacks.
Boundaries and setbacks, yep. So it's always about the minimum setback at the front, and there might be another setback for where the garage has to be. So the garage might have to be set back at least 1 metre from the main face of the house. Building on the boundary, so you can only build on a percentage of the boundary, and then the setback behind that might be a little bit different as well. Usually you can only do to one boundary, and the other one would have to be 1 metre off. That's those sorts of things. So, but they are quite flexible depending on where the area might be. So I've been talking to council recently for a house that I'm working on. And in the development plan, it says that you're allowed to build on the boundary on one side up to a certain distance back. I think up to 8 metres. But the other side has to have at least 1 metre setback. My proposal, however, is in a heritage conservation area, and it doesn't have any setback requirements other than the average of what the neighbours are. So there's nothing mentioned about the sides. So that means that the main development plan overrides is what that is. So I could go to the sides, etc. 8 metres on one boat. But I didn't want to build on any boundary. I want 1 metre setback on the garage side and 2 metres on the other side. So they were quite happy with that, because they said, well, it's usually 3 metres on one side if the boundary's on. If you're building on the boundary, you've got 3 metres between both sides, which is sort of the same. And we'd prefer that, because now you're leaving a bit more space between the houses. Because this is a bit more of a conservation heritage, that's what traditionally buildings had. No one built on the boundaries. So theoretically, you could go to the boundary and we want you to have 3 on one side. But actually, your proposal of some space on both sides is better. So I wouldn't have known that unless I went to them. You know, it would have been one of those things I was like, I don't know where this is going to get through. So they are flexible in terms of looking at the site and seeing what's going to work best for that streetscape. What this little bit of paper here, or this little guide that they've given you, they've said this is what we need when you're lodging. So they need the development application form filled out. They need the Electricity Act declaration completed. That's pretty uniform on every site. Some councils are still running with a slightly older version, but it hasn't changed in terms of what's included on there. All it is like a diagram showing some power lines if you're working on a house that's got overhead power lines, and a declaration to say that you're not going to go within a certain distance of them while you're building and those sorts of things. You need a copy of the current certificate of title. So most clients that you work with will have a copy, because when they bought their house, they would have got a copy, but most clients don't know what it is. So you'll say, have you got a certificate of title? They'll say, I don't know what that is. We probably got one. Say, when you first bought your house, you would have got what was called a Form 1 type thing, which is a folder of information. It'll be with that. They always know where that is. Oh, that's such and such. We put that in the folder. When someone buys a house and then has to move, it goes in a folder and it goes somewhere and never gets out again. So they've usually got that. However, the original one has usually got the old owner's names on it. Okay, because the title doesn't change for a couple of weeks after, and that's what the conveyancer works on in the background. So you pay a conveyancer to make sure settlement goes through. They also issue those documents to the titles office, etc. So if they remember who they use for the conveyancing, they can probably Google or search their emails, and there's probably one sent to their emails that they never knew what to do with, and it's still there. So most people will have it if you point them in the right direction. If they don't have it, you just have to buy a copy from the Lands Titles office.
About $30.
I was going to say about $35.
30,
32,
30,
33,
75.
30, 75, something like that, yeah. Used to be about $16, and then it got privatised.
Every time I look, it's gone up $2.
So, yeah, so I always say around $30. So it's not massive. You basically ring up and you can pay over the phone and they'll send it to you. But council need that because they obviously need, sorry?
You can do it online as well.
Yeah, you can do it online, yeah. Why would council need to have that certificate of title? Making sure that it's the right block that you.
Someone else is going to renovate that house.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm going to build on that block, not mine. Yeah. So they'll also be looking at their boundaries on that. So that's got the correct boundary distances, etc., and those sorts of things. They also need to have a copy of the plans. And any other supporting documents that you might be putting forward. So again, we always think it's just going to be the plans for planning approval, but there is some other things that council might want. So that application that I was just talking about that had slightly different setbacks requirements, or I was allowed to, I talked to the duty planners and that. Because it's in that area, it also has to go with a demolition plan. They need to see that what's happening with the old building before the new one comes in. And also it has to have an arborist report, and it has to have a engineer's report to say that the old one needs to be knocked down because it's structurally unsound. And it also, they said if you can give us some colours, a really good render or some actual description of all the colours that we can see the streetscape, and an architectural statement why you think it works in that streetscape. How does it tick the boxes? So it was like the plans were one, and a landscaping plan. What was happening with the front of the house, landscaping wise, and front fences and things like that. So there was quite a lot more just to get planning. And the planning for that one will be is a category A, so it means that it's when I submit the plans, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, it will go through the normal planning couple of weeks that they'll look for it, and then they'll either say yes, we support this, but that doesn't give me planning permission. It then goes to their development assessment panel, which is 4 members, and there's 3 individual unrelated council people and 1 council representative, and there's got to be 3 to 1 in favour of what the planners have said to be able to do it. So a lot bigger sort of process, I suppose, because it's something that's a little bit more locked down. And for the client, usually you'd say, look, it's probably going to take us about 4 to 6 weeks to get it through planning. That's still the case. The development assessment panel only meet once a month. If they decide that yes, we're happy with it, we're going to say that we support it, but the development assessment panel met last week, we're going to wait another 3 weeks until it goes to the panel. So it's going to be, quite a bit just for planning. So there is some, that's what any other supporting documents might mean. There might be some other factors that they want to see. And your duty planners, when you're talking to them, will say what you need. They'll say, we need to see this, this and this as well. Then they talk about up here, what types of plans. So for garages, carports, verandas and outbuildings, these are the list of plans that they want to see. For retaining walls, swimming pools, what they want to see. For solar panels, what they want to see. Any regulated or significant trees that you on a site that you're proposing to trim, that's a planning application that you've got to put in. And then finally, new dwellings or dwelling additions. So that's what we're looking at. So site plan, and there's a good little example of what they think, this is sort of the minimum that we'd like to see. If it was a new build, it would just say proposed new building here. So this is showing the addition, showing the setback to that boundary there, setback distance at the back, proposed garage on the boundary, any existing trees on the site, elevations, and the floor plan.
Interesting that they haven't asked for dimensions on the floor plan.
Drawn at scale. So the fact that it's to scale is what they're after. Yep. That's why on a planning one, really just minimum couple of strings of dimensions. So it's the site plan's got all those setbacks, and then it's going to be like an overall, and you might have a couple of individual room ones on each side, but you don't need all the nitty gritty of the bathrooms and the lounge dimension to that wall and all that. That's more your construction stuff. Okay, and that's where people start to sort of sometimes go a bit overboard. You'll almost go, I may as well give them the full lot. It's just quite simple. Work on the full lot later. So that's pretty well, gives you a good understanding of what you're required to submit for Marion Council for that planning process for this one. So we look through the development plan to find most of this stuff, and also that little brochure about what to include. So the last thing I'll talk about today is the Resi Code checklist. So down in the research and links section, there's 2 bits. What is the residential code? There's a little link that goes to this little portal that talks about why they set up the Resi Code and where it applies. And underneath that, is the actual checklist. So it sort of gives you a bit of a flow chart of what, if you need to, can you do it? So it sort of says, does the code apply? If no, cannot use it, obviously. If yes, have you supplied the following information? And it basically just goes through what they want you to put on. This is how you sort of, check it. So are you proposing to build a new patch? Yes or no? If yes, start by answering question 1. It just tells you where to go. Is the site within an area where the code applies to new dwellings? So if you click on that one, it actually doesn't go to anything because I've obviously changed it. So we can actually type in SA property location viewer. We go to this map viewer link, and basically you sort of just put in the address, start typing the address. So you probably have you used this before? Yeah. Yeah. So what were we on? Was it 19 Mavis?
10 Mavis.
Oh, 10 Mavis. 10 Mavis Street, South Clinton. So it comes up close to. There's no 10, is there? Oh yeah, 10. There was some old units on there, so it'll come up 10 and 1. And then so we want to open up the data sets on the side here once we've got that area. And in the data sets, there's a few different things. We can look at the environmental and climate sort of stuff if we're looking for bushfire requirements, etc. In the land management section, we're looking for Resi code. So at the moment, bushfire protection areas is already ticked, so we can untick that one and get rid of some of the stuff. It's not in that. You can find out the wind speed usually if you want to tick that one as well. When you tick that one, it'll actually click on that one and say what's here, and this, get rid of that. This actually tells you what's there, and then obviously you'll go through, if you want to find the wind speed, there's your wind speed. Okay. Residential code. Yes, it is in the residential code. Okay. So that's by just clicking on there and saying what's here. All that info comes up through there. Or in some cases you can actually go through and actually tick what you want in the list and find, is it in the Resi code, and it'll give you a red border where that is, which this area is saturated. Most of the areas that aren't in Resi code will be along Marion Road, along here. There's a strip and it's all shops and those sorts of things. And often it's like the airport. That's the airport sort of off to the side down here. It's not obviously in the Resi code. So we know it is in the Resi code, and use those data sets to help you fill out a couple of bits of the other information as well. Does that sound alright? Yeah. So that tends to be what we do, like at this stage. We just got to scroll through all the information and extract for this particular location what we need to know before we start drawing. Okay, and once you've filled out that little sheet of information, you could just set up your drafting notes and write that like that as well. That's when it's then going to be your reference when you start drawing. Right, what was the setback I needed when I put the site plan in? Look at your notes. You don't have to keep going back to all this sort of stuff. It's all there. The other reason that this method works quite well is in a drafting office, it may not be you continuing the whole process. So there might be 10 people in the office and this project's got a deadline of X and now you've got holidays booked. Someone's off sick, so someone else has to jump in. If they've got to repeat all the information and go back and check, it's just a waste of time. But if it's all written there, they just get straight to that document, such and such checked it on this date. I'm assuming that's all correct, and that's off they go. Okay. Any questions? No? So we've done the your file structure is set up, ready to go. You know what you've got to research. And the last thing really is sort of setting up your drawing file. So who has a Revit template that they're going to use? You got one? Yep. So start with like a template that you're quite happy with. At least start with an architectural template in Revit if you don't have one that you're happy with. And you'll work on that for this project and add some things, and then we can convert that to a template as well. So the first couple of things that you'll be doing once you open up your template is actually saving it as this project name. So project 1 with a date on it possibly, and save it into your file, and then start setting up your levels. So where are we going to get the levels from that we work with? Huh? Survey? No. So the building height levels, that's the first thing we're going to be doing. Before we can draw some walls, we've got to do... No. The sketch plans. Remember the sketch plans had the elevation, so they had the ceiling heights and that sort of thing. So that's where you're going to get your levels. Then we're going to set up the wall type, aren't we? So what's the wall type? What was the external walls?
The weatherboard.
Weatherboard. So it's a 90 stud with a weatherboard. How thick are we going to allow for the weatherboard? Straight, if it goes straight onto the frame. So that's the next bit of research. So the answer is not just going to come to you because you probably haven't used that product before. James Hardy, look up the prime line weatherboard. So I've got that link on the site for you, so you don't have to go on a wild goose chase. Straight under the Resi code, James Hardy, go into the designer section. We're going to be looking for the prime line, we'll go products first, sorry. Products, weatherboards, external cladding, did it have one that was weatherboards, I think. Weatherboards down here. Prime line weatherboards, explore that one. And there's the couple of options or 4 options that you've got, don't mind which one you use. And so either one of those, you're going to start to have a look at the technical information over here. And when you find the right bit, so it might be the properties or technical specifications, I would be saving this to your research folder. So whatever the thickness of the plank is, that's what you will allow for your 90 stud, plus the next external layer, just set up a however many mil it is on the outside. Okay, and then on that outside layer, you want to apply a pattern to the foreground, and the pattern will be horizontal model lines. Okay, so next week when we start, like when you've got into all your research, I'll actually go through and start showing you the difference in that. But when you set up hatching patterns in a 3D environment, if you can use, because the models, we're going to orbit this model, aren't we, from the outside, and some views might be perspectives and that sort of thing. Drafting patterns and model patterns, there's two different things about them. Model patterns actually will be true to its representation even when it's orbited. A drafting pattern will always stay horizontal on the screen. So if you've ever done maybe a pattern on the roof and then you orbit your model and it still looks like it's going the wrong way now, that's because you've chosen a drafting pattern. So the reason there's two differences, the drafting pattern should be used for the 2D stuff that's not going to be 3D orientated. Floor plans, maybe just on elevations if it's something specific, but in the outside of the model, like your roof material, illustration, your cladding, choose a model pattern. Okay, it's not hard to change it if you get it wrong, but you might, just so you remember. So that sort of gives you a bit of a head start if you want to start drawing today. Most people tend to just about set their file up and save it, but the research and doing the Resi Code checklist and the other stuff probably get done today. All right. Questions? Well, this subject, I think, for most people, you tend to feel more comfortable when you start drawing. So research stuff is probably like the boring stuff, but it has to be done, unfortunately. So when I worked in offices, I always tried to do all my research stuff in the morning. So I saved it for the afternoon, I just never do it. Once you start drawing, you don't want to stop drawing. It's what you sort of enjoy doing, so. I'm just trying to remember. It's got a floor structure, and I have a feeling I've got your floor there.
Yeah, I saw a floor.
Floor something. Oh yeah. So, in the I've got a separate section: templates, title blocks, and families. If you haven't got a Revit template, there's one that you can start with. Needs a little bit of tidying up. That was one that Russell put up there last year for a few students that have it, so it needs a tiny bit of cleaning up, but it's not a bad one to start with. You can have a look at the site plans if you want, but we won't need those yet. There's also the cover sheet and title block that you have used in the past for Revit Intermediate if you want to use those. They're quite sort of tidy. You could even use those and just take off the TAFE logo if you want. Put nothing on there, or you can keep it on there. But for the future, you might want to take that TAFE logo off and put your own on there.
I did mine a couple of years ago with Russell, but I believe that some of the borders for the edges and things have changed since then. So would it be better if just
whatever you try it? Yeah, try it and have a look. Yeah. There's a couple of other things that you'll need, which is like the meter box. You don't need the ant caps anymore. That's why those are hidden, because but there is the. Did I see? There should be some floor. I will get you the floor. I thought the floor was on there. For some reason it's disappeared. I thought. Oh, where's that?
Just above.
Oh, there it is. Huh? Oh, there. Floor frame. It's under its own section. So, yeah. So that group I put up there. Don't need to worry about it now. Once you draw up your house, if you draw from the structure floor up, so just when you put your floor in, just make up a 22 mil, or is it 19, check the spec, floor, and then draw your walls on top of that. So make that the finished floor level. Start at a level of about 400. We can change that that's going to be the finished floor, 400, because floor framing has to fit under that with the blocks. So I think it's a bit higher than that, but we'll get that right at the end. We can change that, and then set up your ceiling level at 2.4 or 7. Don't even remember. It's been nearly 6 months since we did this one last. But it's in the specs. Draw your walls and everything, and then when we get to it, I'll show you how to import this floor group, so all the floor framing will come in for you underneath. So that's there.